more love, more joy, everything.
It's inspired young people.
Inspiration comes from within you. When you clear out the garbage that's in your mind, you then create space for something better, more beautiful to come in.
Let's have life and have it more abundantly.
I say yes.
It's like taking a workshop. I get to be in my pajamas.
We have a very active imagination, which is why it's important to learn how to harness it and then point it in the direction you want to go.
I listen to your show every day.
It's time now for Living Your Inspired Life with Susan Burrell. Susan is no-nonsense, inspirational, motivational, and fun.
This is positive talk radio.
Practical wisdom for everyday life.
It's a gift you give yourself.
Now, here's Susan.
And welcome to Living Your Inspired Life. You're listening to News Talk 1590 KVTA. And I want to encourage you to go to our website, livingyourinspiredlife.org, and you can listen to all the past conversations that we've had with some really amazing, inspirational people that are doing awesome work in the world, and that's livingyourinspiredlife.org. And speaking of people that are doing awesome work in the world, I am deeply grateful for the work that this gentleman has done over the years, because it's just beginning to change the course of humanity. And so I want to welcome onto the show today Neale Donald Walsch. Neale, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you. It's really lovely to be here.
So I just want to let listeners know, in case they don't know who you are, you've written a series of 9 books. Well, you've written a bunch of books, but there's a series of 9 books that are called Conversations with God. And your latest one is called God's Message to the World. You've Got Me All Wrong. I love that title, by the way.
Thank you.
And so if you would give people just a smidge of your background of why you started this Conversations with God series, in case people don't know.
Well, it wasn't originally created as a series of books, Susan. It was an experience that I was having, a very private experience, frankly. I thought of it as just a process of personal journaling, you know, the kind of stuff we often do at 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning when we can't sleep and so forth. And that's exactly what happened to me. It was literally 4:20 in the morning, and I couldn't sleep, so I got up and took out a notebook and started doing some personal journaling in which I simply asked the God of my understanding. I just said, God, you know, what does it take to make life work? And what have I done to deserve a life of such continuing struggle? Somebody please tell me the rules. I promise I'll play. Just give me the rule book. And after you tell me the rules, please don't change them, because I've noticed that all the rules were changing from decade to decade, sometimes from year to year. So it was just a moment of frustration, but I began to, how to put this gently, receive inspiration. I began to listen to a voice deep within that was bringing me answers, actually. And so I wrote them down. I just wrote down the answers that I was receiving, never, ever imagining that anybody in the world would ever see this except myself. So it was a very private, personal experience, as I said, of personal journaling that went on for not just that night, but I found myself really feeling relaxed and becalmed and feeling better about my whole life. So I kept up the process for night after night after night for about 3 or 4 months until I had many, many legal pads. I was writing on a legal pad. I had many legal pads full of handwritten questions and answers, because that's what was really happening. I got answers to the original 3 questions, and I began to ask other questions. And those answers that I got were not what you'd call normal or orthodox answers. Some of them were a bit unusual. Some of them, frankly, were just a little outside of the traditional spiritual understandings that most people, myself included, were holding. So I would ask other questions like, how can that be? Or I don't understand, or help me to know what you're trying to say. And so what I wound up with was an actual on-paper dialogue, question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. Still, just a very private process. I would refer to these notes whenever I felt a need for a little bit of upliftment or a little bit of personal inspiration. But somewhere along the way, Susan, I was told this will one day become a book. And that's when everything turned for me in my life, Susan, because I thought, now, wait a minute, that's measurable. That's a measurable outcome.
Yeah.
Most of everything else we were talking about was conceptual in nature, just theoretical in nature. And it was possible or it was not. But here was a statement, and it was the first statement in the experience I was having that was measurable. I thought, well, now I've got you. We'll find out whether I'm making this all up in my head or what, because I knew that the chances of this, what was happening to me, becoming a book, were 1 in a million. First of all, nobody would believe I actually had what I wound up calling a conversation with God. Secondly, even if someone did believe it, they certainly wouldn't publish it. A publisher wouldn't put it out there in the world.
Yeah.
And how, how you get a publisher to say yes to something like that when, first of all, I know they receive 600 unsolicited manuscripts a week. The Great American Book, the Great American Novel, and so forth. So it didn't even occur to me that anything could actually happen in that way. A totally unpublished author sending notes to a publisher and saying, I'm having this experience that I'm choosing to call Conversations with God. Would you like to publish it? But as a matter of fact, somebody did take me up on it. They put the book out. The rest is publishing history. The book sold many millions of copies and was wound up translated into 37 languages and found its way to the New York Times bestseller list, where it remained for 2.5 years without interruption.
I have chills, Neale, as you're describing that. That's huge and I remember when your book first came out, the very first one, and there was this flurry. Everybody was passing it around and talking about it. It was like it went viral before we even knew what viral meant at that point.
Yes, and it was astonishing to me, but that, for me, validated at least the possibility that there was something more going on here than just my vivid imagination, that there was something larger happening here. I was continuing, while that book was in the process of being published and distributed, I was continuing my own personal process at home. And so when the publishers called me and said, this is really selling extremely well and people are vitally interested in this, do you have any more of this? I said, well, yes, I've been continuing my personal process. They said, would you mind making your personal process public once again? Could you send us more notes? I said, well, I suppose I could. So I did. I wound up sending them all the notes that I had that produced 9 books, 3,000 pages, in the what has come to be known as the Conversation with God series. And that's the background of it. And I want to make it real clear to anyone who's listening to me that I'm not asserting, it's not my statement that I have a direct line to God any better or any greater or any more powerful than anybody else in the universe. As a matter of fact, on page 5 of the 3,000 pages, it says very clearly, God talks to everyone all the time. The question is not, to whom is God speaking? The question is, who's listening?
Right. And it feels like there's lots of people that have a little bit of they're plugged in a little differently to how they're going to be listening to their particular answers, because sometimes it's under the veil of a philosophy or a religion that kind of has them plugged in differently. I'm being very nice about this.
Well, there's no right way to be inspired. See, here's the question. We have to ask ourselves a very fair, simple question. Where did Michelangelo receive his inspiration for the Sistine Chapel? Where did Beethoven receive his inspiration for the music that he put into the world, the breathtaking music he put into the world? For that matter, where did the inspiration come from for Thomas Jefferson to write a document that's stood the test of time over 200 years that set this country free? Where does that source of inspiration come from? Is it possible that those people were, dare I say it, inspired in a sense by the divine, by God?
No, see, I agree with you. I would say yes, they have been, and then yet I would think the common person, myself included, would go, but they became famous people, and they did famous things. I'm not necessarily doing anything famous in my life, and if I do listen to God or the divine, quote unquote, am I going to be then doing something famous? Because look what happened to you, Neale.
Well, the answer is yes and no. It's not a prerequisite. A person doesn't have to decide that they're going to step out and become a world figure simply because they're having an experience that's quite common. The answer to the larger question as to whom does this happen is that God has assured me, if I could put it that way, that we are all being spoken to all the time, that God has never stopped talking to humanity. I'd like to make a point, if I could, here, Susan.
Absolutely.
Most people of most regular, I want to call traditional religions, never doubt for a moment that God talks to human beings. There's no doubt about that. In fact, they will assert rather forcefully that God did talk to the person whose teachings they believe in and that their religion is based on, whether it's Jesus or Muhammad or Moses or Baha'u'llah or Joseph Smith in the case of the Mormon Church, or any one of a number of other people. So that there are many, many millions, not a few thousand, but many millions of people, actually billions of people in the world, who will assert, oh, of course God communicates to humanity through humanity. It's just that they say, but he stopped. He stopped, years ago. He's had a case of celestial laryngitis. So if it's an old person, an old prophet, if it's a Moses or a Muhammad or, then it actually happened. There's no question. Millions believe it actually happened. But if you say, can it happen 2 years ago? The answer is no. Excuse me, no, it can't happen 2 years ago because God stopped for some unknown reason, stopped communicating with us way back then.
It's interesting that you bring that up, Neale, because what I'm observing in all the different conversations I'm having with people on the show and in my private life is almost that it's not that there's one major prophet that's coming to Earth. It's almost like what you're saying by sharing your story of how you started this conversation is that we are all those conduits or those antennae, if you will, and there are more of us on the planet right now that have opened up to listen to the divine or the source energy or God, whatever you want to call it, and we're beginning to start to network. That's the thing I love to see. And yet there's people that have still, like you were saying, that the ones that believe that God stopped talking 2,000 years ago or 150 years ago, those are the ones that seem to, I don't know if they're listening anymore.
Well, it's a shame if they're not, because even the most conservative members of some of the most conservative religions on the earth would agree that there is modern day revelation. To give you a striking example, not that many years ago, 30 or 40 years ago, the Mormon Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, changed its long-standing policy from the day of its founding until about 40 or 45 years ago that prohibited men of color to become priests in the Mormon Church. As a matter of fact, blacks, men or women, were not even allowed to go into the temple. They were prohibited from doing so. And then about 40 or 45 years ago, I lost track of the exact date, but somewhere in there, the church changed its mind about that and began, number one, allowing blacks to attend services at the temple, and number two, actually allowing priests to be ordained into the Mormon priesthood. Asked what the basis of that was, the president of the Mormon Church at that time, you can look this up on Google, the president of the Mormon Church at that time said he had received a direct revelation that it was time to make that change, that the original policy was actually ill-advised, and that the Mormon Church was responding to that revelation. Similarly, another rather conservative person, actually, who heads a somewhat conservative church, made an announcement a few years ago as well that the years-long teaching, the millennia-long teaching for thousands of years, of a thing called limbo. This is a major doctrine of the Roman Catholic Church.
Oh, yeah.
Was in fact inaccurate.
Uh-huh.
Pope Benedict said, it was a mistake. We were wrong, and there is no such place as limbo, and it was just a doctrine that was not in fact accurate. Asked where that came from, what made him change his mind, the Pope said, "Well, we have not been told all there is to know, and about God and about life and this was a piece of relatively new information that came through to us." So, of course, the Pope always speaks in the plural, first person plural, came through to us. And the Roman Catholic Church, of course, believes that the Pope, and I honor that, I really honor that the Pope speaks impeccably and without error when he speaks ex cathedra, that is, from the chair, on matters of theology. So it is a tenet of the Catholic Church that when the Pope speaks on matters of theology, he can never be inaccurate. He is infallible, the infallibility of the Pope, because it is understood by Catholics that he is being inspired directly by God. Now the question becomes, do you have to be a pope or the president of the Mormon Church or somebody upstanding, highly elevated person in one of the world's religions? Or is it possible that God is talking to all of us all the time, and that we're simply listening to people like the Pope or the president of the Mormon Church because of their position in the world?
Well, your new book that we're about to talk about, excuse me, God's Message to the World, You've Got Me All Wrong. I love what you're saying in here, because you're talking about that some of the new information that's coming in is part of an evolution of humanity, and that the current story or cultural story that humanity across the planet has been living under is a millennium-long, inaccurate, taught story that tain't necessarily so.
Well, I think we have to ask ourselves a question.
Okay.
I'm not willing to say absolutely, positively that it ain't necessarily so, but I'm willing to say, is it okay to ask the question? You see, many religions, many of the world's major and great religions have made it anathema. They've made it absolutely wrong. They've made it actually an offense against God to ask questions like that, to question the doctrine even for one moment, to question the prior assumption. To do so is considered blasphemy, apostasy, and ecclesiastical sin, which in some countries, by the way, can be punished by death.
Yeah.
So we're not allowed to question. What my book does is simply asks the question: is it possible, and I mean just possible, that there's something we don't fully understand here about God and about life, the understanding of which would change everything? And then I lay out 17 statements that people believe about God rather universally. Not everyone, but the largest number of people believe these 17 statements about God. One way or another they do, and I just ask people in the book to question, is it possible that one or two of these statements, if not to say all of them, are in fact not fully accurate? And so that's the point of the book, is to launch an exploration. Is it time, as we move into the final portion of the first quarter of the 21st century, is it time for us, is it okay for us now, as intellectual beings on the earth, to just look at and explore what we've been taught for these many years, and to simply question it and to say, maybe these things are not exactly accurate, and maybe there's something more to understand about all of this that would change the way we live our lives, the way we interact with each other, and frankly, the way we interact with God itself.
So let's dive into that, because let's dive into some of these universal ideas that we have accepted as so because we've been taught that you bring up in your book. Like, one of them is that everybody's been born in sin. In fact, I have a quote about that, if you would allow me, Neale.
Sure.
You say, this just jumped out at me. You say a fundamentally challenging aspect of the human condition is not that we have all been born in sin, but that we have been taught by those who have been taught by those who have been taught by those who have been taught something that is simply not true about who we are and why we are here. It is this misinformation that causes humans to act to this day the way we do. It is not our nature. It is our instruction. And that just reverberated with me because I think that that's so. With and what you've been taught, you can eventually change your mind and learn something else.
It's understandable. You're perfectly correct. I agree with you, and it's understandable how we could have come to these conclusions, because we learned them from people who taught us these things many hundreds, in some cases thousands of years ago, and we are loath to make our ancestors wrong. Rather than make mommy and daddy and their mommy and daddy and their mommy and daddy, rather than make our ancestors wrong, we continue to believe statements that on the surface of them do not seem to be logically or emotionally or spiritually true. But we hang on to these beliefs as well. Beliefs like, for instance, God's love can turn to wrath. God is vengeful, and God's love can turn to wrath on a moment's notice. everyone accepts. Many people accept that as absolute truth. But why would God be wrathful for any reason at all? Why would God, much less send us to the everlasting fires of hell, which, by the way, a previous pope, prior to Pope Benedict,
had a revelation about?
Yeah, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
There's no such place as hell, the Pope said. The Pope said there's no such place as hell. That hell is simply the experience of being separated from God forever, but there's no place of fire and brimstone and the burning, torture and the devil and all the rest. That's all imagery that we need to be very careful about because it's simply metaphorical and not actual. That's another whole story, but the larger question is, why would God be upset with us? For instance, to use just one example, why would God be upset with us because we happen to be Jewish, or we happen to be Muslim, or we happen to be a Baha'i, or we happen to be, a member of a Hindu, a member of any faith except one particular faith? Is it really true that we have a God of the brand name, and that God says every other one of the billions of people on earth who don't fall into that category are automatically not just sent away from God, but, mind you, punished? Even if their search for God was true and pure and real and honest, and if their real and honest search simply took them down a different path, God doesn't say, well, I'm sorry you walked away from me, so you're going to be in this place where you're not united with me anymore. But no, God goes further than that according to belief. The belief is God says, you will now be sent to the everlasting fires of hell to suffer incredible torture for the rest of eternity because you signed up for the wrong religion.
That just makes me laugh, Neale, because it just sounds kind of ludicrous. And people believe it.
Without wanting to dishonor anybody's beliefs, but is it okay to question it? I'm not sure that it sounds ludicrous to some, and to others it sounds like absolute truth. Fair enough. I honor a person's belief around that. But is it possible for us now to at least question it? Is it possible that maybe it isn't quite like that? Here's what I experienced, Susan. My experience is this. People of religion and people of faith seem to me to be like we were when we were children, like children who have learned to add and to subtract and then imagine that's all there is to mathematics. I can recall when I came home from school and I learned to add and I learned to subtract. Wow, I could do math. But then imagine if I stopped there and I thought that's all there is to mathematics on the earth. Forget about multiplication, forget about long division, to say nothing of trigonometry or higher math. We're just satisfied. So I think what's happening is that in the world's religions is not that the religions are false or wrong. They're simply incomplete. They have part of the data, and they think they have it all.
Right.
I think the day will come when people will say, you know what, God doesn't really care if you're a Jew or a Hindu or a Buddhist or a Mormon or don't belong to any church at all. If your search is true, if your yearning is pure, if your life has been lived in ways that announce that you are honest and compassionate and caring and forgiving and generous and loving, unconditionally loving, that's what God cares about.
So let's talk more about these inaccuracies that you have been questioning in your book, God's Message to the World, because I think it's important for people to get the grander idea of what your questioning has led you to, and then leads us to in the book. So there's other things like God sometimes answers our prayers and sometimes does not, or God is on our side.
Yes, that's why we bend down and make the sign of the cross when we score a touchdown, because God's on our side and not on the other team's side.
Good grief. It sounds like a lot of division and divisiveness and separation as opposed to coming together as a human kind.
It is because, you're absolutely right, it is because we see ourselves as separate in any event from each other, and in some sense from life. That is, we see life as a process that's going on, but over which we have precious little control. And that, in turn, is because we see ourselves as separate from God itself. We have engaged on this planet in what I call a separation theology. That's a theology that says that we're down here and God's up there, and never the twain shall meet, except perhaps on Judgment Day, and that's it. that separation theology is fine if that's as far as it went. I mean, people obviously can believe what they choose to believe, and I have no quarrel with that. But the problem is that separation theology doesn't stop there, because such a theology produces across the planet a separation cosmology. That is a cosmological way of looking at things that says that everything, in fact, not just us and God, but everything is separate from everything else. We live in a milieu, if you please, in an environment where things are separate from each other. Codependent, interdependent for sure, interdependent no doubt, but separate nonetheless. And such a separation cosmology produces a separation psychology. That is, individual psychological profiles that allow us each to feel lonely and alone in a world with 7 billion people in it, because at some fundamental level, we accept that we are all separate from each other. And the separation psychology ultimately produces a separation sociology. That is, entire societies that imagine that they are not only separate from each other, but better than each other. And finally, a separation sociology ultimately and inevitably produces a separation pathology. Pathological behaviors of self-destruction observable everywhere on the planet. The whole string, from theology to cosmology to psychology to sociology to pathology, which we see every day on this planet, that string can be cut and broken and severed forever. And the behaviors of humanity on this planet can be changed overnight with the acceptance of a single idea and a single concept. We are all one. Not just one with each other, not just one with the earth or one with life, which is not bad as a start, but actually one with God. That there's no separation between us and God any more than there's a separation between a drop of water and the ocean from which it has emerged. That both are the self-same exact essence. One is merely a tiny expression of the overall other. So I can sit here and say to you, I'm not going to say I'm God, because I'm not the totality of God, but am I an individuation of God? As a drop is an individuation of the ocean? You bet I am. There's no separation in that sense. And every living human being is, in fact, an essence of the divine. Once we understood that, we can begin using the powers that the divine has gifted us with, including the power of positive thinking, which, by the way, I should mention, was something that opened my mind, that my mind was opened to in way back in the 50s when I was a young man. I'm now 71, and I read a book written by a man 10 years earlier than that. He wrote it in the 40s, who happened to be a Christian minister, who wrote an astonishing book called The Power of Positive Thinking.
Yeah.
His name, of course, was Reverend Dr. Norman Vincent Peale. That book stands as a pioneering book. It says that God has given each one of us a part of itself, the power to use our mind alone, just as God has done, to create the outcomes with which we most earnestly desire. So it goes beyond just simple prayer. It's not just praying to God. Norman Vincent Peale told us, this Christian minister told us, that every thought you have is a prayer.
Neale Donald Walsch, I'm so enjoying this conversation. We're talking to Neale about his new book, God's Message to the World. You've Got Me All Wrong. And you're listening to Living Your Inspired Life. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back.
Hi, this is Susan Burrell from Living Your Inspired Life. I always find it easier and more fun to expand my life by being connected to open-hearted, like-minded people committed to being on the same path I am. If you feel the same way, I suggest you visit a Center for Spiritual Living. There are wonderful communities in Ventura, Ojai, Santa Barbara, Oxnard, Pleasant Valley, Camarillo, and Westlake Village. You'll find terrific people, great information, and more tools to help you live the life you were born to live. So go to csl.org to find a center near you. That's csl.org for a center near you.
Welcome back to Living Your Inspired Life. I'm Susan Burrell, and we're talking with author Neale Donald Walsch about his latest book called God's Message to the World. You've Got Me All Wrong. And right before we went to break, Neale, you were talking about how we are all one in this place of what we call God or divine essence. And one of the things you say in your book is that we are a manifestation of God's energy, and how we use the energy that we are determines how we experience the life that we live. So can we speak a little bit more about that?
Yes. I believe that the thing we call God is the source of all intelligence, all wisdom, all clarity, and, of course, of all love and deep understanding and all the rest, all the qualities that you would attribute to God. But those qualities are formed and shaped in the physical world in a manifestation that we call pure energy, simply energy. Anyone who's ever taken a lie detector test understands that even your thoughts are energetic and can be measured. Your thoughts can be measured by the physiological responses of your body. So we notice then that all thought is energy, not just God's thought, but our thoughts, because of what God has given all of us as a characteristic of our own aspect of the individuation of divinity is the ability to use that energy, to focus it, to apply it in a focused and intentioned way to produce outcomes in our lives. In other words, our beliefs, the things that we firmly believe, tend to send energy out from us, from each one of us, into the world at large, and to affect other energy, the energy of other people and the energy of other expressions of life in the universe. Even, if I could put it this way, the energy of events, that is, energies that cause events. So what we notice is that we have the opportunity in life to take this raw energy that God has given us and to send it out into the world in a way that produces real-world outcomes. And when more than one of us does it at the same time in the same way, if we are gathered together and sending that energy in a particular way, we can really, really, really become powerful creators.
One of the analogies you used in your book was about the atomic energy. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Well, I'm not even sure what I said in the book about that. Remind me.
Well, you were talking about how when the atomic energy was discovered and scientifically, and everybody was all excited about all the good how it was going to be so positive, and then
yes, and then of course we wound up using it for entirely different reasons, and decided that we can split the atom, and by doing so, it creates a physical phenomena that can be as destructive as it can be constructive. And this is exactly the same way. I forgot about that analogy that I put in the book. Thank you for reminding me. This is exactly the same way that we can harness the energy of divinity, the energy that is, if I could put it that way, life itself. And in fact, we do it. We do it every single day through the process called thinking and the process called believing. Obviously, every spiritual teacher on the face of the earth, ancient and contemporary, has made some statement along these lines: as you believe, so will it be done unto you. As you believe, so will it be done unto you. Not just a belief in a particular religious icon, but any belief. If you believe that you're going to be successful, if you believe that you're going to be abundant, if you believe that you're going to find the right and perfect partner in your life, the right and perfect job,
or you believe you're going to be unhappy, or you believe you're going to get cancer.
I was just getting to that, exactly.
Yeah.
The opposite is also true. If you are an eternal pessimist and say, well, I never win contests, there's no point in entering, you're right, there is no point in entering, because you've already decided you can't possibly win.
Right.
And if you think that your thoughts, both negative and positive, have no impact on your life, I want to say, think again, because in fact they do. And the books such as The Power of Positive Thinking have made that very, very clear. A man named Émile Coué in France in the First World War was a doctor and a philosopher. And Émile Coué decided to conduct a little experiment. He was a doctor in the field during the First World War, and he visited, of course, all the tents, the field tents of the injured and the wounded. And he took his population group and split them in half. The first population group, he asked them to say 100 times a day what has become a famous affirmation: every day, in every way, I'm feeling better and better. Every day, in every way, I'm feeling better and better. The second half of the control group, he said nothing to about it. He didn't feel he was withholding anything from them. He wasn't withholding any actual medicine or any actual treatment, just an idea. Well, guess what Émile Coué discovered? The people in the first control group, the soldiers there, recovered with amazing speed and with a very high percentage of recovery versus the control group that was not given that affirmation to say. Émile Coué, therefore, came up with what he called the power of autosuggestion. That's just one simple, small, tiny example of the kind of power that God has joyfully given to all of us, saying, you know what? You all have this power residing within you, and you can use it in any way that you wish. My favorite prayer, I call this power prayer, by the way.
Yeah.
I love to pray, and I pray all the time. And my favorite prayer is a prayer of gratitude. I've been using it now for 20 years. It's never failed me. Here's my favorite prayer. Thank you, God, for helping me to understand that this problem has already been solved for me.
Ooh, I like that. Thank you, God, for helping me understand that this problem has already been solved for me. I felt that when you said that, Neale.
It's a powerful, powerful prayer. And in the moments of my life when I've encountered difficulties, challenges, and problems, when I felt myself set back and thrown for a little bit of a loss, if not a big one, I've been able to say that prayer over and over again. I'll give you a 30-second example of the most dramatic illustration of that in my life. I was diagnosed with tuberculosis about 6 years ago. And I couldn't believe it, but I sat there, and I thought, okay, fair enough. If this is what it's going to be, this is what it's going to be. If this is what's going to take me out, this is when it's take me out. I decided not to fight it and just to accept it, to embrace it, and to be grateful for it, in the sense that it was perfection personified, leading me to the highest evolution of my soul's progress through life itself. And I sat there for days, for 3 or 4 days. Thank you, God, for helping me to understand that this problem has already been solved for me. 5 days later, I get a call from the administrator of the hospital where I had my tests done. Mr. Walsh, we don't know how to tell you this. We hope you won't be too upset with us, but there's been an error in the blood sampling in the lab, and they mixed your sample up with somebody else who regrettably does have tuberculosis, but joyfully for you, it turns out you do not.
Of course.
This is a true story.
I believe it.
I hung up the phone and I raced downstairs and jumped over the fence between my backyard and my pool. And my wife looked at me and she said, you know what? In all the years we've been married, I've never seen you run and jump a fence. What is going on? I said, I don't have TB. Thank God. So there is a force in the universe, I promise you. And I call it God. People can call it anything they want. But there is a force in the universe that exists not separate from me, but that runs in, through, and as me, that God has allowed me to tap into whenever I wish, and the degree to which I have faith in that force, in that power, to that degree I can produce results in my everyday life, in small things and in large things.
Neale, I want to expand on that idea that you just put there about the in, through, around, and as me, because another quote from your book, you say, life affects life through the process of life itself. The essential essence is an energy that has an impact upon itself. Now, those two sentences right there, we can just chew on for, a few days to really get the whole juice out of it. But this idea that life affects life through the process of life itself. So can you expand on that?
Well, I think, frankly, the sentence says it all, what we find out is that energy is a circular phenomenon. It's not a straight line phenomenon. It's a circular phenomenon that affects itself. So, a negative energy creates negative energy, which creates negative energy, which creates negative energy. And likewise in the positive sense. And that creation of that energy begins to spread out from its core to all other expressions of energy in the universe. So that life impacts upon life through the process of life itself. What I think about life is how life shows up for me. It's amazing that two people can look at the exact same exterior circumstance and have two remarkably different experiences of it.
Yeah.
Simply by the way they're thinking about it. So this is common. This is such common psychology, really. This is not even spirituality. This is basic psychology. And anyone who's taken a course in psychology in college, much less someone who's graduated as a psychologist with a degree in psychology or psychiatry, will tell you that. There's not a doctor in the country who would not also agree that their favorite patients are the patients who have a positive sense of the possibility of their recovery, because without a question in their mind, a higher percentage of those patients actually do recover than those that do not. So there's no question that the energy of life that flows through everything is connected to itself, if you please, and that therefore life affects life through the process of life itself.
So
we are in control of that process. That's what I think is not really widely understood.
No, I don't think people. There are many days where I forget that I have a say about what goes on in my life.
We need to know that the exterior reality that we are experiencing is collaboratively created. It's created by the lot of us. That is, more than one of us are co-creating the exterior experiences of our physical reality. It is the interior experience over which we have sole and complete control. Therefore, all of us can sit there, and here's the perfect example of this: is rain on Saturday. Mm-hmm. The farmer whose crops have not had any rain, any moisture for the past 3 or 4 months, is sitting there praying for rain. Please God, please bring rain for me. Man, the person across the town, who is the parade organizer for the town, he's worked for 6 months to organize the parade. He's gotten all the floats together and all the dignitaries and all the cars and the convertibles. Everybody's ready to go. He says, please God, don't let it rain. Whatever you do, don't let it rain on Saturday. So that's a perfect example of two people and of our population that are collaboratively working to produce an outcome. Well, as it happens, it rained on this particular Saturday. That's an exterior event. The farmer is delighted. The parade organizer is furious. God, how could you have let me down? So, but the true master understands that what is occurring outside of oneself, which is being collaboratively created by the lot of us, it's a co-creation. It's not where the power of creation resides. The power of creation resides interiorly. It is how we experience inside of ourselves and respond inside of ourselves to whatever is being manifested in our exterior reality that produces our sense of ourself, of our life, and of what's really going on around us. The problem in the world is that people don't pay attention to these things because 98% of the world's people are spending 98% of their time on things that don't matter. They think that life is about get the guy, get the girl, get the car, get the job, get the house, get the spouse, get the kids, get the grandkids, get the better car, get the better job, get the better spouse, get the better spouse, get the better spouse. Get the retirement watch, get the the cruise tickets, get the illness, and then get the heck out. And that's the end of life for most people. They do not think, wait a minute, maybe there's something more going on here. I want to suggest to the world that there's something more happening right now in our life than simply getting through. There's something larger going on than the one with the most toys at the end wins. There's something more going on. Sarah, human beings have to make a fundamental decision. We have to make a fundamental choice. Who actually are we? Are we, in fact, simply biological creatures? Are we simply, expressions of chemical physicality, no different from a dolphin or a whale or a bird, except as to the complexity of our formulation? Are we simply a highly complex mammal on the earth, but nothing more than that? Or, in fact, are we spiritual beings who have a body, who have a mind, but you are not your body? You simply have a body. It's something you have. It's not something you are. The same is true of your mind. If that's true, if we decide, you know what, I am a spiritual being. I'm not just a mammal. I'm not just a more sophisticated dolphin or a more complex version of a whale. I'm actually a different kind of being in the universe. I am a spiritual being that has a body and a mind. If we think that's true, and we may not, but if we do, we must ask a fundamental question. If I really am a spirit running around this planet with a body and a mind, why am I doing that?
Right.
What is the point?
And you talk about that in your book, Messages from God, about the idea that we have become, like you just said earlier, our focus is on something that is material, and we don't know really what our purpose is. And because we think we get to say, well, it's God's plan or it's God's will, and yet we are not aware that individually we are the creator of our life, that divine essence gets to experience. And so we do have some say-so, and yet we don't have a true purpose individually or as humanity of why we're here.
I think it's important for people to understand that God does not have a plan for us. It's not God's plan that I'm going to be first baseman for the New York Yankees and you're going to be a ballerina in the New York City Ballet. It's not God's plan that I'll have an auto accident on Tuesday and suffer a major injury, which I did, by the way, once in my life, and I broke my neck.
Ouch.
And I was inches from death, frankly. People don't break their necks and survive. I'm very, very, very lucky. But you know what? When the doctor said to me, "You're one in 100,000 people who actually has a broken neck and suffered. Not only did you live, but you have no paralysis. That's very, very, very unusual." You know what one of my friends said to me? "Well, it's God's plan."
Yeah.
Oh, really? It was God's plan that I have the accident, or God's plan that once the accident happened randomly, that the outcome was God's plan? Which part of it was God's plan? And do we really think that God has a specific plan for each one of the 7+ billion people on the earth, on this particular planet, which is one of a billion planets in one of a trillion solar systems in the universe? Is that really what we are imagining? Or does God simply give us the power through the process of life itself to create our own plan, using the greatest gift that any deity could give any sentient being, called free will? So I imagine that, in fact, that God does not have a plan for every single person on the earth. Yes, when you're 37, you'll get divorced. When you're 43, you'll strike it rich. When you're 57, you're going to have a close brush with death. And when you're 75, you're going to die. No, I don't believe in predestination, and I don't believe in God's plan, because that's simply not my understanding of how it is. But God's idea, God's process, is to imbue every sentient being in the universe with the power to collaboratively create and individually express their own highest idea about who they are, who we all are, why we're here, and what we're up to. What is the purpose of life? If 98% of the world's people have no idea what they're doing here, what do the 2% understand? That life has nothing to do with the material aspects of our experience. Life is, in fact, immaterial. Those things are immaterial. What is important to the soul is, have we used this lifetime to express and experience our highest notion of God itself? That's what Jesus did. That's what Buddha did. That's what Muhammad did. That's what Moses did. That's what Mother Teresa did. That's what Helen of Bingham did. That's what all the masters, male and female, on this planet have done. They have said, there's something more going on here, and I choose to experience and to express that. I choose my life to be an expression of that. I choose divinity flowing through me, in me, as an expression of who I really am. And I choose to give people back to themselves so that everyone else whose life I touch has the same experience at one level or another. And that's what every master on this planet has ever done.
And I would suggest that is not just for the masters to do, again, and I know this is what you're saying, but I just want to say it out loud for myself, that it's for us to do individually. And again, it doesn't mean that you have to become rich and famous, that when you become rich and famous or the spotlight's on you, that means you have done the thing that God said through you to do. I would suggest that there are people on the planet that are doing those things already in a very quiet and profound way that touches individuals, and that is, I agree with you, Neale. That is the whole reason why we're here. And to think that it's about stockpiling oil or taking over a country or keeping food from people that need it because I don't want to give it to them, those kinds of things, we're in a completely dark place if that's where we're operating from. My opinion. That's just my opinion.
I agree with you, and I think we've missed the point of all of life. We have not stopped enough to ask ourselves, really, what is the purpose of this? What is the point of this? And it's not just a philosophical question. I'm suggesting that if we answer the question, and we do so accurately, that life on earth will change dramatically, and we will, in fact, be able to produce heaven on earth as it has been predicted that we will one day do. And that day will come when we shift our global awareness of who we are, where we are, why we're here, and what is the purpose of life on earth, and what happens, for that matter, after life on earth, if anything at all. So it's a very, very interesting subject to take a close look at.
One of the things you talk about in God's message to the world is also about having this conversation that you just said, asking those questions within ourselves individually, and then having larger conversations with your friends, with your peer groups, and not be afraid to question, having it be a dialogue as opposed to a debate, not having it be...
We have to ask ourselves a fundamental question, excuse me, Sarah, but you're right. And when we have those quiet conversations with our friends, we can start by asking a fundamental question. How is it possible? How do you think it's possible, we can ask our friends, for 7.5 billion people on the earth to all claim they want essentially the same things: health, peace, security, opportunity, love, joy? How can we all want essentially the same thing and be unable to get it? How is it possible for only 5 to 7% of the world's population to experience those things, and even they don't experience it consistently?
Mm-hmm.
How is it possible, for that matter, for us to move into the 21st century more deeply and still have 2.6 billion of us on this planet who don't even have indoor sanitation?
How is it possible, Neale? I don't understand.
Because of the ideas that we hold that their problems are not ours. Sorry, I know, Neale, you can throw all kinds of statistics at us. You can tell us that 656 children die every hour
Mm-hmm.
On this planet of starvation. You can tell us that 1.5 billion people, by recent surveys, do not even have electricity in their house. They don't even know what electricity is about experientially. They know that it exists, but they don't have it. You can tell us all about 1.7 billion people who don't have access to clean water. Oh, Neale, stop it. We know that life is not going well here. But you know what the problem is? None of the systems we have put into place are working. We created a political system to bring nations closer together and make people of all nations feel secure. It's doing exactly the opposite. We created an economic system to at least bring equal opportunity, if not equal outcome, to people everywhere on the earth. It's produced exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
We produce social systems to bring greater harmony between people and greater cooperation. It's produced exactly the opposite. And sadly enough, more sadly than anything, we have produced religious systems that were ostensibly designed to bring us closer to God and closer to each other, and it's produced exactly the opposite. Is anybody looking? Does anybody dare ask the question? Maybe there's something we don't fully understand here, the understanding of which would change everything.
Okay, I'm waiting. I want to hear what the understanding is.
2 parts.
Okay.
One, we have set the wrong priorities. We're after the wrong stuff. We have set entirely the wrong priorities for ourselves and for the human race as a collective. We have imagined, in fact, that life is about get the guy, get the girl, get the car, get the job, get the house, get the promotion, get the better car, get the better job, get the spouse, get the kids, get the grandkids. It's not about that. Those are things we can do as an expression of what life is about, but that is not the baseline of what life is about. So the first thing that we don't fully understand is we have messed up our priorities. The second thing that we don't understand, which is really the most important thing of all, is there's no separation between anything. We are, in fact, all one. I am not my brother's keeper. I am my brother.
Wow.
I am no separate from anybody else than the fingers of my hand are separate from my hand itself.
Mm-hmm.
My fingers are separate in the sense of being individualized, and they each perform their own function, and so they're individually expressing as digits on my hand, but they're not separate from my body, nor are we separate from the body of God, nor, in that sense, from each other. When I look across the room and realize that I'm looking at myself in a different form, it would be impossible for me to allow an obscenity like 656 children dying every single hour on this planet of insufficient food, while we are throwing away more food in the restaurants of New York City every night than would be needed to feed those children for a week.
Yeah. Neale Donald Walsch, I'm appreciating this conversation, and we're just about out of time. I want to talk just briefly about your website and how people can get there. And there's a place on your website where there's an opportunity to participate in the conversation of how do we write a new cultural story for our humanity. So would you give everybody that information?
Sure. They can get to my website by just using my initials, NDW. That's for Neale Donald Walsch, and the address is ndwhome.com. That gets them to my homepage. ndwhome.com will get them to my homepage. And once they get there, they can go to CWG Connect, which is a special place on the website that allows them to connect with me on a daily basis, to interact on all of these questions, to offer their own suggestions, and to join with us in creating a new cultural story for humanity.
I think it's so important that we all do that. The book is called God's Message to the World. You've Got Me All Wrong. Neale, thank you so much for the work that you've been doing in the world and your willingness to share your inner personal experience with everyone. And I'm just going to finish with, and so it is, namaste.